Our first presenter is Dr. Mark Bradley, who will speak to us this morning on the three-day Battle of Bentonville, North Carolina in March 1865, which was the last large-scale battle of the Civil War and the largest engagement ever fought in North Carolina. It's his area of specialty. Dr. Bradley received a Ph.D. in history from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. His books include Last Stand in the Carolinas, The Battle of Bentonville, and North Carolina, A Military History, which was recently published and co-authored by a very fine young historian, me. He is an historian at the U.S. Army Center of Military History, which is where I got my start and met Mark, and is now writing the official Army history of logistical support in Vietnam. So welcome, Mark.
Thank you, John. As the title of my presentation suggests, my focus is on the ordeal of combat in the Battle of Bentonville, and in a larger sense, on the pain, suffering, and death that were the Civil War soldiers' constant companions. How ironic that a battle resulting in more than 4,000 casualties once served as little more than a footnote to the closing events of the war. Veterans of Bentonville sought to rescue the battle from obscurity by writing of their experience. Many of them appear in these pages. On the afternoon of March 18, 1865, Union Major General William T. Sherman was nearing the end of his 450-mile march from Savannah, Georgia to Goldsboro, North Carolina. After resting and resupplying his army group at Goldsboro, he planned to resume the march to Richmond, Virginia, the Confederate capital, and link up with the forces under Union General-in-Chief Ulysses S. Grant. Together, they would defeat Confederate General-in-Chief Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia and bring the war to a victorious conclusion. The man who Lee had appointed to, quote, concentrate all available forces and drive back Sherman was General Joseph E. Johnston. Since he assumed command on February 22nd, 1865, his forces had fought 3 battles against the Federals in North Carolina, but had failed to halt Sherman's progress. On March 15, Johnston made his headquarters at Smithfield, roughly midway between Raleigh and Goldsboro, Sherman's 2 most likely targets. Johnston knew that he would have to act soon to have any chance of defeating Sherman, who would soon be reinforced by Union Major General John M. Schofield's army. Fortunately for the Confederates, Johnston's cavalry commander, Lieutenant General Wade Hampton, had found an excellent location to launch a surprise attack on an isolated wing of Sherman's army group, which was heading for Goldsboro. Hampton described the ground as, quote, the eastern edge of an old plantation, lying principally on the north side of the Goldsboro Road and surrounded east, south, and north by dense thickets of blackjack oak trees. Hampton was describing the Willis Coal Plantation, located about 2 miles south of Bentonville. The force Johnston would attack was the Union left wing, or Army of Georgia, commanded by Major General Henry W. Slocum. On the afternoon of March 18, the only force standing between Slocum's wing and the coal plantation was a small cavalry division led by Colonel George G. Dibble. I deemed it vitally important that I hold this ground until the arrival of Johnston's army, Hampton noted. So I ordered Dibble's cavalry to dismount and throw together a fence rail barricade along the eastern edge of a cornfield. I also placed my 2 artillery batteries in a commanding position north of the Goldsboro Road. As Hampton mounted his horse to ride off to another part of the line, he overheard one of his veterans remark, old Hampton is playing a bluff game, and if he don't mind, Sherman will call him. Hampton conceded that the soldier was right. I knew that if a serious attack was made on the guns, They would be lost, he wrote, but I determined to run this risk in the hope of checking the Federal advance. Hampton did not have long to wait. A column of 90 Federal horsemen came thundering up the Goldsboro Road at dusk, led by Major James T. Holmes of the 52nd Ohio Infantry. Holmes' foraging detachment had skirmished with Dibrell's cavalry for most of the day, and Holmes hoped that one more attack would push the Confederates out of the way. Instead, Holmes wrote, my force was met by a volley of musketry and artillery that told me I had run into a force too large to drive off. After an hour or so of skirmishing with the enemy, we returned to camp empty-handed. I reported to Generals Morgan and Fearing, my division and brigade commanders, and warned them that I expected the rebels to put up a fight the next day. General Morgan disagreed and said that he expected my detail to reach Goldsboro by sundown. I told him I did not think that would be possible. Nonsense. You'll go right in, young man, the general assured me. I closed my journal entry for that day with 3 words: we shall see. On the morning of March 19, Sherman prepared to join the right wing, or Army of the Tennessee, under Major General Oliver O. Howard, which was advancing on roads about a day's march to the south. According to a staff officer, the Union 14th Corps commander, Brevet Major General Jefferson C. Davis, interesting name for a Union general, told Sherman that the Confederates were giving ground very stubbornly and seemed eager for a fight. No, Jeff, Sherman replied. There's nothing there but Dibrell's cavalry. Brush them out of the way. I'll meet you tomorrow morning at Cox's Bridge. With that, Sherman and his escort headed south to join Howard's wing. Brigadier General William P. Carlin's division of the 14th Corps had the advance. Once again, Major Holmes' detachment failed to break through Dibrell's cavalry and was skirmishing with the Southern horsemen. Holmes told Carlin that his foragers had, quote, pushed down on Johnston's line and developed both musketry and artillery. According to several of Holmes's men, Carlin, quote, poo-pooed the idea of infantry being in his front. It did not propose to be delayed in his movements by cavalry. When his lead brigade was ready to advance, Carlin turned to Holmes and said, get your bummers out of the way. I'll drive the rebels out with a skirmish line. Carlin then proceeded to lead his division into a Confederate trap. As for Holmes, the Battle of Bentonville haunted him for the rest of his life. If some generals had not been overwise, he wrote in 1901, and had listened to the facts and opinion which I promptly and carefully delivered before the battle, Bentonville would have had a different history, and many a good soldier would now be living whose bones are dust. Carlin's skirmishers had no trouble driving back Dibrell's cavalry across the coal field. But after the horsemen had disappeared into a belt of trees, a thunderous volley of musketry and artillery greeted the Federals, who hugged the ground. Confederate Major General Robert F. Hoke's infantry division blocked the Goldsboro Road, while rebel soldiers of the Army of Tennessee, commanded by Lieutenant General Alexander P. Stewart and Lieutenant General William J. Hardee's corps, deployed at a 90-degree angle on their left, their presence shielded by thick woods. One of Johnston's brigade commanders, Brigadier General Daniel H. Reynolds, became one of Bentonville's first Confederate casualties when an artillery round struck both him and his horse, Old Bob. Reynolds left a graphic account of his wounding. The shell, he wrote, entered my horse's breast and came out under my left leg, cutting away my stirrup and breaking my leg just below the knee and tearing off a great part of the calf of my leg. It then killed a horse standing next to mine. My horse reared up. Taking my right foot out of the stirrup and with my hands, I threw myself out of the saddle, falling on the dead horse, the blood from my horse's side spurting over me. Fearing he might fall forward on me, I called for help, but it was already there. My litter bearers, seeing me fall, had come running. Reynolds was carried to the Confederate Field Hospital at Bentonville, where surgeons amputated his left leg just below the knee. Meanwhile, General Carlin deployed all three of his brigades, but could not budge the Confederates. In the words of one federal veteran, quote, "We began to hear a refrain that had not been uttered since the Atlanta campaign of the previous year. The rebels don't drive worth a damn." Growing impatient, General Slocum ordered Carlin to launch a probing attack to develop the rebel forces' size and strength. One of the defenders, Major L.P. Thomas of the 42nd Georgia Infantry, recounted the Union attack on the Army of Tennessee's line. "Attention, 42nd Georgia," I shouted to my men. "Hold your fire for my orders, and when you fire, give the rebel yell." Bravely onward, the enemy marched in grand style. Nearer and nearer they came. When the Yankees approached to within 40 yards of my line, I at last gave the order so anxiously awaited. A sheet of fire blazed out from the hidden battle line of the 42nd Georgia. We poured volley after volley into them, and great gaps were made in their line as brave Federals fell everywhere. Their colors would rise and fall just a few feet from us, and many a gallant boy in blue is buried there in those pines who held Old Glory up for a brief moment. And this is how the assault appeared to one of the attackers, Lieutenant Marcus Bates, the commander of Company C, 21st Michigan Infantry of Buell's Brigade. Incidentally, Buell's Brigade was the smallest brigade in Sherman's Army group, numbering just 650 officers and men. And as luck would have it, they sustained the most casualties of any Union unit at Bentonville, losing over a third of their numbers, 225 to be exact. The regimental color bearer, Sergeant Frank Foster, was Company C's first casualty, Bates wrote. Although shot in the wrist, Foster bravely clung to the flag, keeping it aloft, beckoning us on to victory or death. Corporal Mock was the first man in my company to fall, shot through the abdomen, from which he died the night following. We passed Corporal Kilmer a moment later, lying on his back dying, his feet squarely to the front, his smoking musket grasped firmly in his hands. A few paces farther along lay a young Confederate soldier about the same age and build, also dying. It has always seemed to me that these two fired and fell together. Louis Messiker, one of my oldest and best men, was the next to fall dead. My brother, shot through the thigh, made his way to my side to tell me he was shot. I could only tell him to make his way to the hospital as best he could alone. Although severely wounded later that day, Lieutenant Bates vowed that he, quote, would not fill a North Carolina grave. He survived and returned home to his family in Michigan. Although the Confederates had decisively repulsed Carlin's probing attack, Slocum remained unconvinced that he faced a serious threat. That is, until he received a report from the front by a trusted staff officer, Lieutenant Colonel Henry G. Litchfield. Well, General, Litchfield said, I have found something more than Dibrell's cavalry. I find Confederate infantry entrenched along our whole front, and enough of them to give us all the amusement we shall want for the rest of the day. The time was 1:30 p.m. Slocum scribbled a note to Sherman describing his predicament and requesting reinforcements as soon as possible. He left his two 14th Corps divisions at the front to bear the brunt of the expected enemy assault, and deployed his two 20th Corps divisions on the Reddick Morris farm a mile to the rear in case the 14th Corps line broke. For Johnston, the deployment of his army, quote, consumed a weary time, he recalled. At 2:45, he gave the order to attack. Colonel Charles W. Broadfoot of the North Carolina Junior Reserves Brigade described the last grand charge of the Army of Tennessee. "It looked like a picture and our distance was truly beautiful," he wrote. "Several officers led the charge across an open field in full view, with colors flying and line of battle in such perfect order as to be able to distinguish the several field officers in proper place, and followed by a battery of horse artillery which dashed at full gallop, wheeled, unlimbered, and opened fire. It was gallantly done, but it was painful to see how close their battle flags were together, regiments being scarcely larger than companies, and a division not much larger than a regiment should be." And incidentally, the unit that he was watching was Edward C. Walthall's division of the Army of Tennessee, which numbered just 240 officers and men at Bentonville, less than a tenth of their numbers the previous year in the Atlanta campaign. Carlin's troops fought desperately, but the Confederates heavily outnumbered them and easily outflanked their positions. "We stood as long as man can stand," wrote Lieutenant Charles S. Brown of the 21st Michigan Infantry. "And when that was no longer a possibility, we run like the deuce." Private Joseph Hoffhines of the 33rd Ohio Infantry described the route of his regiment. "In falling back, we came in full view of our enemies. Here was our greatest peril. Here they poured in one continuous fire of destruction. One man was shot down right by my side. On the other side of me, another poor fellow was shot in the back of the head. The ball come out at his nose and it tore his nose almost entirely off. I did not know, but every moment would be my last, and put an end to all my fond hopes of ever seeing home and friends again in this world." Many of Carlin's men did not stop running until they reached the John Harper's farm 2 miles to the rear, the Harper House serving as a Union Army field hospital. A federal staff officer, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander C. McClurg, galloped to the front around this time to assess the situation for his boss, General Davis. "Many balls were whizzing in every direction, although I was far from the front line as I had left it only a short time before," McClurg recalled. "The roar of musketry and artillery was now continuous. The noise of battle seemed more than men could bear. Checking my horse, I saw the rebel regiments in front in full view, stretching through the fields as far as the eye could reach, advancing rapidly and firing as they came. The onward sweep of the rebel lines was like the waves of the ocean, resistless. With the rout of Carlin's division, it was up to Morgan's division to stem the rebel tide on the coal plantation. Morgan's troops received unexpected help from the opposing Confederate commander, General Braxton Bragg. Though ordered by Johnston to launch an assault at 2:45 p.m., Bragg unaccountably waited until 4 o'clock to attack, giving the Federals invaluable time to dig in. This is how the work appeared to one Union officer. "It is surprising to see the rapidity with which men will entrench themselves under fire. A few rails piled up in a twinkling, then dirt thrown upon them with numberless tools, bayonets, frying pans, bits of board, bare hands, anything to move dirt, and it is not long before a protecting mound rises sufficient to cover men lying behind it. And as the digging proceeds, the ditch deepens as fast as the mound rises, till in an almost incredible space of time, an entrenchment has been thrown up sufficient to protect men from cannon shot as well as rifle balls. Carlin's retreat left the rear of Morgan's position vulnerable. To plug the gap, General Davis called on Brigadier General Benjamin D. Fearing's brigade. "Advance upon their flank, Fearing," Davis yelled. "Deploy as you go. Give them the best you've got, and we'll whip them yet." As the men cheered the general and charged toward the Goldsboro Road, Sergeant Levi Ross of the 86th Illinois overheard Davis tell his staff, "Those men are marching straight into hell." "And so we did go there," Ross commented. The Confederates' fire was so heavy that Lieutenant Colonel Allen L. Fonstock of the 86th Illinois ordered his regiment to hug the ground. But the rebels still claimed dozens of Federals and killed and wounded. The bullets flew like hail among the pine trees, Farnstock wrote. General Fearing was among the casualties, losing his thumb and forefinger to a Confederate minie-ball. Although driven off, Fearing's spoiling attack disrupted the Confederate assault from the rear and enabled Morgan to deal with the attack from the front. Confederate Lieutenant Colonel John Douglas Taylor's former artillerymen were fighting their first and last battle as infantry. They overran Morgan's fortifications, but paid dearly for their brief success. The repulse of the Confederate units on either side exposed them to a lethal flank fire. I was standing atop the enemy's works when I saw a Federal about 20 paces away aim his rifle at me and fire, Taylor recalled. The bullet struck me in the left arm near the shoulder and knocked me off my feet. The men who carried me from the field had to step carefully, for the ground was covered with the dead and wounded of my command. Of the 267 officers and men in Taylor's unit, 152 were killed, wounded, or captured in a matter of minutes, a casualty rate of 57%. That night, Taylor's shattered left arm was amputated. According to Sergeant Francis McAdams of the 113th Ohio Infantry, we opened upon the rebels such a fire as carried death and destruction with it, and before which a man might not hope to advance and live. The Buckeyes maintained this rapid fire for, quote, a long while, McAdams added. The rear rank of the 113th Ohio loading the rifles and the front rank firing them. At one point, McAdams' file partner leaned forward and shouted into his ears, "My God, Mac, these guns of ours are getting too hot. We'd better rest." McAdams merely shrugged and told his comrade to keep loading. After repulsing 2 Confederate assaults, Morgan's Federals were running out of ammunition. The regimental commanders decided to launch a counterattack. The fighting was hand to hand. In the midst of the struggle, recalled Corporal George W. Clute of the 14th Michigan, I saw a Confederate flag and made a rush for it. Clute was referring to the colors of the 40th North Carolina Heavy Artillery. It was in the hands of a lieutenant. He and I were out of ammunition. Nothing but a trial of strength could determine which one of us was entitled to those colors. Clute proved the stronger of the two, dragging both color bearer and flag for 100 feet before the tenacious rebel officer finally let go of the staff and ran back to his lines. A few minutes later, Clute saw the gray-clad lieutenant emerge from a cloud of smoke. As his eyes fell upon me, Clute continued, he, quick as a flash, took aim with his revolver and fired at me, the ball entering my right arm. Then he, with like suddenness, disappeared. Although the rebel color bearer had gained some measure of revenge, Clute still held the colors of the 40th North Carolina, and for his heroism, he would receive the Medal of Honor 3 decades later. Having driven off the Confederates in front, Morgan's men realized that they were receiving fire from the rear. They crouched behind the front side of their earthworks and returned the enemy's fire. Meanwhile, General Slocum sent Brigadier General William Cogswell's 20th Corps Brigade to deal with the Confederates behind Morgan's division. While Cogswell's men attacked the Confederate rear, Morgan's troops struck the front. The rebels soon found themselves all but surrounded. Having a horror of being taken prisoner, wrote Private R.A. Lambert of the 42nd Alabama Infantry, I took my chances as all others seemed to be doing. I saw through the big pine timber in front a line of Yanks. The woods looked blue with them, but they were standing still and not firing a gun, which they could not do without endangering the line we had just left in front of us. We suddenly found ourselves in a hollow square, the enemy on 4 sides of us, and each line close by at that. Our men who got out were either those who hid themselves in thick bushes until after dark, or those fleet afoot. I was in the latter class, and I am not ashamed to own up to such on that particular occasion. Private Hiram Smith Williams of the 40th Alabama Infantry was less fortunate than Lambert, becoming a POW to avoid being shot down. Williams was an atypical Confederate, a native of West Bloomfield, New Jersey. He had been a journalist, a painter, and an actor before the war. Williams noted that his captors, quote, gave us credit for fighting them as hard as they were ever fought. And some told me it was the first time their line was ever broken. Some thought we had whiskey to incite us on. Quite a compliment. In describing Morgan's Stand south of the Goldsboro Road, Lieutenant R.J. Heath of the 34th Illinois wrote, "We saw nothing in 4 years of Army life to compare with that 19th of March at Bentonville." The battle shifted from the coal plantation to the Reddick Morris farm, pitting two old adversaries, Confederate Brigadier General William B. Tolliver and Union Brevet Major General Alpheus S. Williams. Tolliver commanded a division in Hardee's Corps, and Williams led the 20th Corps. Their rivalry dated back to Stonewall Jackson's Shenandoah Valley campaign of 1862. The fight on the Morris farm was the Confederate high water mark at Bentonville. Tolliver's Georgia and South Carolina troops left the cover of the woods, raising the rebel yell. Surgeon H.C. Robbins of the 101st Illinois found the yells, quote, blood-curdling. Chaplain L.W. Earl of the 21st Michigan wrote, "Such fiendish yells never saluted my ears before. Why, it seemed as though the doors of perdition had been thrown wide open and that all the devils were out." The Confederates were met almost immediately by, quote, a leaden hailstorm of shrapnel from the Union artillery, recalled one Southerner. Hundreds of iron and lead balls tore into the gray ranks or plunged into the sandy soil at the rebels' feet, creating a blinding sandstorm. My eyes were in a moment filled with sand dashed up by the shrapnel, which struck all around, recalled South Carolinian Corporal A.P. Ford. I wiped them with my hand and, keeping them closed as much as I could, kept on at a run. The Confederates advanced to within 30 yards of the Union line, but the combined firepower of the Bluecoats infantry and artillery proved too much for the attackers, and they fell back. E.D. Westfall, a reporter embedded with Slocum's headquarters, described the final Confederate assault on the Morris farm. The rebels, masked for final effort, emerged from the woods just as the sun went down. They came into Mr. Morris's open field silently, without that yell universally accounted part of a rebel charge, and marched steadily on towards the Union line. They were received with the heaviest musketry the Federals could give them, at which many of the gray masks put up their hands deprecatingly, as I have seen bummers do while fighting bees. The exertions of their officers, who were truly brave, brought them on in some kind of order, past a point where a hidden line of bluecoats could get a flank fire on them. This added to their misery, yet they stood it bravely and came on. The final attack, however, failed like the others, and in the words of Westfall, the Confederates, quote, retired hastily and in confusion. The Union line on Morris's farm had held. While Slocum's wing fought at Bentonville, Howard's wing marched on roads to the south, the noise of battle audible since mid-morning. Sherman and Howard made their headquarters at Falling Creek Church that afternoon. Couriers from Slocum arrived to update Sherman on the battle. A messenger rode into camp while Sherman was resting in his tent. Lieutenant Colonel William E. Strong, one of Howard's staff officers, described the scene. The commander-in-chief would have made a good subject for Punch or Vanity Fair, Strong wrote. Every officer present was nearly bursting with laughter at Sherman's ludicrous appearance. Being, of course, anxious to hear the news of Slocum's fight, he rushed out to the campfire without stopping to put on his clothes. He stood in a bed of ashes up to his ankles, chewing impatiently the stump of a cigar with his hands clasped behind him, and with nothing on but a red flannel undershirt and a pair of drawers. Slocum informed Sherman that he had repulsed the Confederates, but he urged the commander to send reinforcements at once. Sherman assured him that, quote, the army is coming to you as fast as possible. True to his word, Sherman ordered the right wing to march at dawn. Major General John A. Logan's 15th Corps led the way, with skirmishers driving a large force of Confederate cavalry before them. We followed the rebels up one hill and down another, noted Captain John D. Alexander, who commanded 3 skirmish companies of the 97th Indiana Infantry. They would wait till we got to the top of a hill, give us a volley, and run until they got over the next hill. When a Union skirmish line became winded, another skirmish line would take its place. Lieutenant Henry H. Wright led the 6th Iowa Infantry skirmishers as they approached Johnston's position at Bentonville. We charged the rebel cavalry and flanked them from all 6 of their barricades until we came on to their main line of infantry. We heard the rebels beat the long roll in their camps and heard the bugles sound the attention and could hear the officers giving commands to the men. With the right wing's arrival, Sherman's army group outnumbered Johnston's Army of the South by 3 to 1, roughly 60,000 troops to Johnston's 20,000. Johnston remained at Bentonville to draw off his wounded and to bolster the morale of his men. He established a bridgehead to cover his only line of retreat across a flooded Mill Creek at Bentonville. For the next 2 days, the Union and Confederate armies skirmished and occasionally launched an attack to test the enemy. The sector occupied by the North Carolina Junior Reserves Brigade and the 14th Michigan Infantry was especially active, noted the reserve's Major Walter Clark. Between the almost continuous firing and the Yankee scamps trying to creep up on us in the dark, the 18-year-old Clark wrote, I have been unable to sleep since assuming command of the reserve skirmish line. He called the scrap with Lieutenant Colonel George W. Grumman's 14th Michigan skirmishers, quote, a regular Indian fight of it behind trees. Grumman tersely reported that, quote, the enemy's skirmishers kept up a brisk fire, doing but little damage. I lost 1 man wounded. But that was on March 21. On the 20th, Grumman lost about 50 troops in a reckless charge on the reserve's main line. Less than 2 years later, Grumman would meet his demise in the Fetterman fight on the Bozeman Trail in Wyoming in Red Cloud's War. The last unit from Howard's wing to deploy at Bentonville was Major General Joseph A. Mower's division of the 17th Corps. Nicknamed Fighting Joe, Mower seemed determined to live up to his reputation. Colonel Charles Sheldon of the 18th Missouri Infantry overheard a brief conversation between Mower and his corps commander, Major General Frank P. Blair. I suppose, General, Mower said, after I get into position, there will be no objection to my making a little reconnaissance? To which Blair replied, none at all. Mower's idea of a little reconnaissance was to assault the Confederate left flank, which was held by a thin screen of cavalry, with his entire division. It took several hours for Mower's troops to reach the Confederates due to the swampy terrain and briars that resembled barbed wire. Meanwhile, Johnston ordered General Hardee to assemble a force to counterattack the Federals. About 1:30 p.m., Mower struck the Confederate left flank. We dashed forward like good fellows, loading and firing as we went, and yelled our best at the same time, wrote Lieutenant John H. Ferguson of the 10th Illinois Infantry. Captain John Nielsen of the 25th Indiana recalled that his company, quote, advanced under shelling and heavy musketry firing from the enemy. Cap Wren fell dead from a musket ball piercing his forehead just above his right eye. He knew not what hurt him. To Private Abel Stillwell of the 64th Illinois, which was on the skirmish line, it appeared as though Johnston's whole army was retreating. Mower's skirmishers overran Johnston's headquarters and reached the outskirts of Bentonville. Just then, General Hardee attacked with his hastily assembled force that was a mixed bag of infantry and cavalry. Hardee personally led the 8th Texas Cavalry, or Terry's Texas Rangers, in a headlong charge. The Rangers' newest recruit was the general's only son, 16-year-old Private Willie Hardee. The Confederates succeeded in disrupting Mower's charge and in driving the Federals back from Bentonville. During the counterattack, Private William Andrew Fletcher of the Rangers confronted a group of Union soldiers with some fight left in them. I was about 50 yards to their front demanding surrender, Fletcher recalled, thinking they were cowed. But 2 shots from the bunch made me think they were not a surrendering lot. So I got out of the scrape, scared but not hurt. After their 2 shots, I was satisfied they were on to their job and were reserving their fire, or they would no doubt have emptied my saddle. I have often thought of all the simple acts of my life, this one headed the list. After this, bullets seemed to make a greater noise than usual. As the Federals fell back, Hardee turned to several officers and exclaimed, "That was nip and tuck." And for a time, I thought Tuck had it. Incidentally, on the left is a photograph of General Hardee. In the center is a monument to the Texas troops who fought at Bentonville. And on the right are the colors of the 8th Texas Cavalry. Just then, Hardee glimpsed his son, Willie, slumped over in his saddle, held up by a ranger who rode behind him. Willie had received a mortal chest wound and had less than 48 hours to live. As his father looked on, the youth was placed on a stretcher and carried to a waiting ambulance. Mower's charge convinced Johnston that he had pressed his luck long enough and the time to withdraw had come. That night, his army evacuated its position at Bentonville and began the march to Smithfield. Lieutenant William Calder of the North Carolina Junior Reserves was among the last Confederates to leave amid a driving rain. "My feet were soaking wet, my overcoat saturated," he scrawled in his diary. "I laid on the cold, wet ground with nothing over me and got a few moments of hurried sleep. I passed a miserable night." Johnston's army had survived to fight another day. But Bentonville was Sherman and Johnston's last battle. Rather than pursue the Confederates with his exhausted and ragtag army, Sherman marched on to Goldsboro, where reinforcements, rest, and supplies awaited. In late March, the Battle of Bentonville was front page news, but by April, the public's attention turned elsewhere with the fall of Richmond, Lee's surrender, Lincoln's assassination, and Johnston's surrender to Sherman at the Bennett Place on April 26. Nevertheless, many veterans of Bentonville refused to forget. "We have injured Sherman a good deal," General Hampton wrote his sister, "so that he cannot boast of getting through free." Colonel McClurg doubtless spoke for many of his Union comrades when he wrote, "They may have looked back to Chickamauga and to 20 pitched battles besides, and may still have thought that none of them had they a hand in such stubborn work as that at Bentonville." Thank you.
Yes, Doctor, what were I don't think I'd ever heard of referred to as the Junior Reserve Unit. I'm not sure I'd seen that in the Confederacy, or did the Union have it as well as the Confederacy, or what was with the Junior Reserve Unit?
It was really, the Junior Reserves was a North Carolina unit. It was Confederate. And the regiments, it was actually formed a brigade, and at Bentonville, it was the largest brigade in Johnston's army, numbering over 1,200 troops. They consisted mainly of 17-year-old boys. The units were raised in 1864 to offset the loss of more senior soldiers. And their purpose initially was to just serve at the home front, guarding bridges, railroad depots, and so on. But as the manpower shortage worsened in the Confederacy, the Junior Reserves began to see frontline duty. And by the spring of 1865, they were fighting at Wise's Forks and at Bentonville in North Carolina. And incidentally, the commanding officers weren't much older than the boys that they led, Colonel Broadfoot, for example, was just 21 years old. And as I pointed out, Walter Clark, the future Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court, was 18 at Bentonville. So as Governor Zebulon B. Vance wrote to President Jefferson Davis, said they were robbing the seed corn of the Confederacy by using the junior reserves on frontline duty.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes. Well, that's a good question. Actually, it initially was the hospital for the Union 14th Corps. But after the battle, after the Federals had evacuated and moved on to Goldsboro, it became a field hospital for the Confederates and remained so for several months. So yes, it served as both a Union and Confederate field hospital. Yes.
Thank you very much. At this point, what do the Confederate on the command level and on the grunt level think they're doing? The
Yeah,
war's
that's
over. They're
That's
gonna kill a
one
lot
that
of
we
Yankees,
could spend a
but-
lot of time on. I would say that it probably varied. I think the lower you went into the ranks, probably the more confident they were that they were doing something really important at Bentonville. And they were stopping Sherman from reinforcing Lee up in Virginia. The more senior commanders like General Johnston, his belief was very different. When he was given command in February of 1865, he thought the best they could do, the Confederate Army, was to secure fair terms of peace from the North. And that was why he fought at Bentonville, to make we'll say, make the decision to negotiate a little more tempting for the Federals.
Okay, Mark, we've got a question from our audience virtually. In your opinion, did this battle prevent Sherman from reaching Petersburg to support the armies operating against the Confederate capital?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, it was General Grant and General Sheridan who actually wrested the final campaign from Sherman's grasp. Sherman wanted to participate in the final defeat of Lee's army up in Richmond and Petersburg. And he was doing everything he possibly could to make that happen. In fact, after he reached Goldsboro, he took a train to the coast, took a ship up to City Point, Virginia, so he could confer with General Grant. He also happened to run into President Lincoln, who was up there too. And his whole point was to try to persuade General Sheridan to delay the start of what became the final campaign to defeat Lee's army. But General Grant was determined to do this without Sherman's help. He wanted the Army of the Potomac to get all the credit for defeating Lee. And they succeeded in doing so at Appomattox Courthouse on April 9, 1865.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the Army of Tennessee was
Yes.
involved in this. After Franklin and Nashville, what was left of it?
Yeah, not much left of the Army of Tennessee after Franklin and Nashville. The contingent that made it to Bentonville numbered about 4,500 officers and men. And as I pointed out, Major General Edward C. Walthall's division numbered 240 at Bentonville. The numbers, I think, were something like 4,000 in the Atlanta campaign of 1864. This army was just all but annihilated at Franklin and Nashville. And it was really just the skeleton force that made it to North Carolina.
Okay, Mark, another question from our online audience. What were the casualties on each side for the Battle of Bentonville?
The Federals around 1,500 and the Confederates about 2,600. So it's a little less than Bull Run, John. So you got me beat there. Yeah, roughly 4,100 casualties at Bentonville. And I know that doesn't seem much for those of you who see these massive casualty lists from battles like, well, the Wilderness, Spotsylvania Courthouse, or Gettysburg. But in 1865, that ranked as a very, very bloody battle.
I'm sorry, you probably covered this earlier on, but I didn't catch the numbers. What were the total numbers engaged as far as Union and Confederate?
60,000 on the federal side and about 20,000 on the Confederate side. So Sherman actually outnumbered Johnston 3-1. That's why Johnston wanted to fight at Bentonville so urgently, because he knew that once the two wings of Sherman's army reunited at Cox's Bridge en route to Goldsboro, the game would be up. He simply could not cope with those numbers. And imagine what it was like when he had to face not only Sherman with his 60,000, but also Schofield with 30,000 troops. He had 90,000 troops. In fact, Johnston said to General Lee, "There's nothing I can do. All I can do is wait for you to break out of Richmond and join me in North Carolina." And of course, that never happened. Just as Sherman never reached Richmond himself.
Okay, got one more final question from online. You mentioned the 8th Texas
Yes.
being at the battle. And was that related to today's modern Texas Rangers?
I'd say not officially, but I think that in terms of we'll say the elan and the dash of the 8th Texas Cavalry probably had some influence on the Texas Rangers, but it's not an actual command connection.
Okay, thank you. Let's give Mark another round of applause for his presentation. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mark. Glad to have you here.